been about 11 months since I created this channel, and during that time I've managed to only make videos on Resident Evil, minus the one video I made on The Evil Within, but who cares about that? I'm getting very close to 1,000 subscribers, and I never really thought I'd even make it to 100, but here I am, just a fingertip away from monetization. So I wanted to say thank you to everyone that subscribed and just watched our video or left a comment. And in true YouTuber fashion, I figured I'd celebrate this almost milestone by recycling old content. So you may or may not know the very first video I made was me ranking the main series Resident Evil games from worst to best in my opinion. And now that Resident Evil 8 has come out, I figured now was a good time to update the ranking because, you know, some of my opinions have changed a little bit, and, you know, not many people have seen my original ranking, and not many people are going to watch this one if I just keep talking forever. So the games that I'm going to be ranking are the main series games. Just to clear it up, these are the versions that I'm ranking: the Resident Evil GameCube remake, the Resident Evil 2 remake, the Resident Evil 3 remake, Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 5, Resident Evil 6, Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil Village, and Resident Evil 0. These aren't the only Resident Evil games that I've played, but I haven't played all of the other ones, so I figured just simplify the list into the main games, and it would be, you know, easier to understand and make more sense. Now, the last important thing to know is my ranking criteria, and there's only one thing that I'm ranking them on, and that's how much I enjoy playing them. Obviously, things like replayability and story play into how much I enjoy playing them, and I'll explain a little bit about what I like and dislike about the games. But yeah, it's very opinionated. It's because, you know, it's just based on if I enjoy playing them, and I enjoy playing all of them. Kinda. You'll see. I really want to like this game, but every time I'm about to go back to it, I immediately want to stop playing it. And that's the only Resident Evil that makes me feel this way. I absolutely hate partner mechanics for the most part in Resident Evil games, and this is the game that I hate them the most in. I hate having to manage the inventory of both Billy and Rebecca, having to look at both their health items, having to do separate things as the two different characters. It's just a lot to keep track of, and I've been a fan of Resident Evil's inventory management aspect for a while, but it just feels like way too much of a chore in this game. And that really sucks because it's the only game on this list that is similar to the Resident Evil 1 remake. Since I'm not ranking the original Resident Evil 2 or Resident Evil 3 or Code Veronica, the only two fixed camera angle games I'm ranking are this one and 1. And I love 1, but honestly, the partner stuff, it ruins it for me. I know that if they somehow made Billy and Rebecca have completely different stories and you could pick between the two, like in Resident Evil 1, and they added item boxes, this would probably be one of my top Resident Evil games. But with the gameplay how it is, it's the only Resident Evil that I just don't want to have anything to do with. I know this probably isn't many people's least favorite Resident Evil, but for me, it's at the bottom by a large margin. I actually enjoy Resident Evil 5, which I can't say the same for Resident Evil 0. So everything from here on out, I have a fairly positive opinion of, but there is a reason that 5 is below almost every other game. And it's easy to pin most of that blame on Sheva, Chris's partner, throughout this game, and honestly, a lot of it has to do with her AI and partner mechanics. But the nice thing about this game is you can actually play with a real person instead of having to babysit an AI. That being said, I wouldn't really ever want to go back and play through Resident Evil 5 by myself, but it does have fun moments in co-op. I love some of the co-op boss fights against Jill, against Wesker. There's also some really horrible boss fights as well, though. But to sum Resident Evil 5 up, it's like a co-op Resident Evil 4 with very little to no identity. At least in my eyes, that's how I see it. It doesn't have really any horror factor to it, so it's boiled down to a co-op shooter. And when you take the co-op away from it, it's kind of a boring shooter, in my opinion. So that's why I have it as low as it is. I think it's fun multiplayer, but when I'm by myself, I really don't ever want to play it. This is the one that's going to get me in a lot of trouble. I know that Resident Evil 4 is a top tier game, for most Resident Evil fans. And I do like the game, don't get me wrong. And I know many people would think it unforgivable to have Resident Evil 4 below Resident Evil 6, what many would consider to be the worst. But please remember, it's all opinions. I'm not saying this is a statement of fact. Now, Resident Evil 4 is by far the best single-player experience out of what I would say the shooter genre of Resident Evil games, 4, 5, and 6. 4 is the best single-player experience. Ashley's AI isn't horrible. I don't mind the missions, or, sections where you have to guard her, protect her. The scenery is awesome. It is actually scary in some sections, unlike 5 and 6. But I just don't find myself wanting to replay it. I have to admit that the controls in 4 are the worst out of all the games on this list. I don't mind fixed camera angles, and the tank controls in 5 I feel are much easier to get a hold of than the ones in this game are. But the controls really aren't a deal breaker for me because, it has its own little charm about it. But to be blunt, I just don't find the game extremely enjoyable like I do a lot of other games in the series. The game is definitely very historical, very important, and, it deserves a lot of the praise it gets. But for me, it's just not something that I want to come back to that often, and that's why I have it at number 7. So please try to go easy on me for this one. I can understand if it feels wrong for you to see this, and it's a little weird for me too, because this game and 4 were reversed in my original ranking. 4 was above 6, but after some reflection and some bracing for some disagreement, I decided that I enjoy playing Resident Evil 6 more than Resident Evil 4. It suffers similarly to what 5 does in that I don't really want to play it solo. Like I said, 4 is the best solo experience out of this trio of games. But I have a lot of fun with the co-op in this game, and that has a lot to do with the movement options. This game has the most refined movement out of 4, 5, and itself 6. And being able to sprint and slide and jump back and roll around and shoot and kick, it's really enjoyable. Sure, the story's kind of lackluster, some of the characters are boring, but honestly, I like the gameplay in this game better than 5 and 4. The environments are pretty cool for the most part. It gets kind of annoying visiting some of the same locations through the different campaigns, but I also really like the concept of the intermingled campaigns and competing online against other players who are doing a different campaign at the same point as you are. Even though that aspect of the game is completely dead now, it's a really cool aspect. I mean, honestly, just a lot of the things Resident Evil 6 did are really cool. It gets a lot of flack, and it should. It goes really far away from what a lot of people enjoy about Resident Evil games. But at the end of the day, I like playing it, and that's why I have it above the other games on this list. So here at the top 5, I'd say that these are the games that I just absolutely love. I have been kind of talking about the negative points for a lot of the games up until now. But for these, it's probably going to be a lot of positive talk. And a lot of people actually have mixed feelings about the Resident Evil 3 remake. And yes, it had a lot of missed potential. It could have been a lot better. But that doesn't change the fact that I really, really like the game. The only thing holding this game back from being possibly, top 2, 3 for me is how linear it is. The game you can most closely compare this to is Resident Evil 2, obviously, because they play very, very similarly. The one thing I like about this game better than 2 is the boss fights. What they did with Nemesis was really cool. Changing up his forms from the original game was really good in my opinion. But the overall areas that you explore are really linear. There's a few optional things you can find, but in the long run you're moving from area to area, from downtown Raccoon City to the subway, the sewers, and there's really no backtracking that isn't scripted, because once you go to a new loaded area, that's it, you have to keep moving forward with the story. But the gameplay's really fun. I like the dodge they added. I don't like the fact that there's no mode with limited saves, but with how linear the game is, I kind of get it. But all in all, the game looks great, plays great. It's just a solid game. The only thing holding it back is the linear nature of it and the fact that it could have been longer and had more content. Resident Evil 7 deserves a lot of credit for bringing the game back into the spotlight. It's no secret that the series was in an uncertain place for years after 6 came out. After 6 we had Revelations 2, and I wouldn't exactly say that was a blockbuster hit. But finally in 2017, this game comes along, and it brings with it the new era of horror we've kind of seen. People might say Outlastian. That's a cool term. People should start using that. But yeah, the game was a little more jump scare heavy, put you in first person, and it was more of a mainstream horror game compared to what Resident Evil had been. And it is the game that actually got me into the series. So no, I was not a fan from the very beginning, sadly. I was introduced to the game with 7, and despite how different it is from most of the other entries, I was very happy to play the rest of the games and experience the wide variety of gameplay throughout the Resident Evil series. Now, in my opinion, 7 is the scariest game in the whole franchise, and I feel like that's largely due to the claustrophobic nature of the house, being stalked by Jack, the old house super creepy. I just love the overall vibe of the game, and it mixes in Resident Evil stuff pretty well. The inventory stuff's good. The puzzles a little lackluster, but they're still there. The game's just fun to play. It's creepy, and I've replayed it a number of times. Madhouse is great for mixing things up. It'll freak you out when you've already played the main game and it throws curveballs at you. It's just all in all an excellent game that I feel most anyone could enjoy. The only negative things I hear about it are from longtime Resident Evil fans who don't like the mainstream horror aspects. But in my opinion, I think it was necessary to keep the series going, considering how long Resident Evil has been in existence. So up at number 3 we have the OG, kinda, the remake of the original. And this is the game that I've replayed the most out of all the games in the series. And you may think, well then why isn't this game your number 1? And to that I say, I don't really know. I just played this game a lot, but it's not my favorite, but it's very good. Now to all you fixed camera angle haters out there, I don't know what to tell you. Because, yeah, it's off-putting at first, but it really gives the game a personality. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for a remake of this game in the style of RE2 Remake and RE3. Like, that'd probably be my top Resident Evil game of all time if that happened. But this game is awesome because it has an insane amount of free roam ability to it. You are free to explore pretty much the whole mansion. Sure, there's some things you have to do before progressing at certain points, but everything you do is up to you. And on top of that, pretty much the entire game is backtrackable up until the very last section, which I think is just so cool, because when you can fit in what is probably around an 8-hour experience on your first go-round into a map that can be, explored that whole time, and you keep finding new things, that's just really impressive to me. And this game is the epitome of having to manage your resources and inventory, and I love it. It's awesome not having a partner to have to worry about at the same time when doing this as well. This is Resident Evil 0, but really good. Yeah, the dialogue's corny, the story's, but it's the gameplay that counts, and it's really fun. I get why a lot of people are scared to get into it. The camera's weird. It's hard to move around if you don't understand it. But once you're past that, this is one of the greatest games of all time, and I love it. So, Village has been out for over a month now, so I don't really think this is a compulsive placement at number 2. I really do think that Village is the perfect blend of Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 4. And that's coming from someone who had 4 ranked as low as I have it here. The environments in this game are amazing, the gameplay is really fun, and the story is engaging. I didn't think it was as creepy as 7, but I think they were going for that. They were trying to make it more action-packed, but still have creepy bits. But everything about this game is just fun. The castle is by far my favorite area. It's beautiful, but that doesn't mean the rest of the game isn't great as well. Even my least favorite area, which is probably most people's least favorite area, the factory, I still thought looked really cool and I enjoyed most of it. And the only complaint I had coming out of the game was wishing there was more to it. And for every great game, that's something you should wish for. I could go on for a long time about all the things this game did right, but to sum it up, the combination of great enemy variety, great location, a lot of freedom with inventory. The Resident Evil 4 inventory works so well here. And a story that made you want to keep going and find out what would happen next. It just made for a really entertaining game. The Duke giving you a map of all the treasures really lets you feel like there's a lot to explore, and there is, for the village area being, it's not small, but when you get used to it, you realize it's not as big as you first think it is. But all in all, it's a great game, but there is one that I think still tops it by a good bit. The Resident Evil 2 remake is what every remake of any game ever should strive to be. I mean, it's great. You really don't see any complaints at all about this game like we're seeing with Resident Evil 3's remake. And the reason that this game is my number one has nothing to do with it being a great remake. It's because it's just a great game, and I think it's the best Resident Evil that there is. I think it takes all of my favorite elements of the series and just does them all at their best. Like one, it's got a map that you can backtrack for a majority of the game, and it's all about managing your resources and deciding, do I need to kill this zombie? Should I try to run past it? And one of my favorite parts of the game is like the way you can shoot zombies' limbs off. You could do that in 3 too, but it kind of just exploded. But in this game, you actually like see the limb come off, and like it's all strategic because you could save bullets instead of trying to kill a zombie. Just shoot its leg off so it's super slow and crawls around. And unlike in like 7 and 8, when enemies will just despawn if you run past them and come back to that area later in the game, the zombies stay there pretty much the entire game. So you've really got to keep track of what you're doing and how you're spending your resources. Not to mention that this game did hardcore so well. Having the ink ribbons and having saves actually matter, it just made it such a fun game to play. And it still is a fun game to play. And it does the stalker mechanic, probably the best out of every game in this series with Mr. X. It is genuinely nerve-wracking having to collect pieces of important items in the police station when he's just wandering around on his own. He makes the game 10 times more stressful, and it makes it 10 times better. And if I had to say one negative thing about this game, it's not even that negative. It's just me, grasping for things, but it does get kind of annoying fighting Birkin as the boss for almost every boss encounter. But his boss phases are so different that it really doesn't bother me all that much anyways. So yeah, this game, it brings everything together so well. And the only way I see this game really ever being topped on my list is if we get a Resident Evil 1 remake done in this style and it's done just as great as this one was. But to be honest, I don't need that. I'd love it. But I think this series is really great. Even the games that a lot of people say are awful, I get a lot of enjoyment out of. And I hope that this series keeps running for a long time. Because after 8, I have a lot of high hopes. They've been producing really great games these past few years. So here's hoping to whatever game comes out next being amazing. Thank you for watching. Thanks again for, subscribing and whatnot. Not quite at 1,000 yet, but, who knows? Maybe I am by the time you're watching this. So thank you. And I'll see you in the next one.